Hello and welcome back to another beautiful puzzle from Dvoretsky Endgame manual. It's why to move and draw this game. And trust me, the first move is not an easy move to find. I will give you a few seconds to see if you can find the correct solution. I think many are tempted to play King G3 here, to try and go after black pawns. But this will be a mistake, and now black is winning this game by moving King to E1. A quick note here, King E1 is the only move that wins this game for black. If he play King to E2 for example, this will be a draw. The problem with King G3 is that you will not be able to defend your pawn anymore. When you start improving in chess, you will start thinking in squares and the importance of them. What do I mean by that? Let's look at our king and pawn position. The only squares for our king to defend our pawn are those on the G file. Here, black plan is to take your pawn, and he is willing to sacrifice one of his own to do that. But black wouldn't just think about how should I take that pawn. A much more powerful way of thinking is from which square can I take that pawn? Because let's say you will continue with King G4. While both King E2 and F2 are winning here for black, we could see that King F2 is more clear and easy for black to win this game. By moving to the F2 square, he is now attacking your pawn, while also blocking you to go to G3. F4 is also covered by black pawns, so in the next move, white has no way to keep defending his pawn. His best option is to take the G pawn. Black will take as well, and white will not be in time to stop the E pawn. I hope this thinking in squares makes sense. We will explore this in more depth in this puzzle, so you should get a better understanding about this. The same thing happens here with King H3. White would allow black the access to the F2 square, and we will see a similar outcome. Even if white can move to G4, after King G2, white wouldn't have any square available from which he could protect his pawn. So, he is forced to take, resulting in the same losing scenario. But if white will go to G2, now black cannot go to the F2. So, the other square from which he can attack white pawn is E2. This is why he will go there next move. In this puzzle, black cannot push either of his pawn, because white will capture it and he cannot stop the pawn. This is why black needs to use his king in order to first capture white pawn, and only after that he will think about how to promote one of his own. This position is still losing for white. The only square available from which you can protect your pawn is G3. We saw that if black arrives on F2, white wouldn't have a square from which he will protect his pawn. This is why black plan is to arrive there. Controlling the F2 square is one of the critical points in this position. This is why here black would play king to F1, preventing him to move to either F2 and G2, and white is forced to allow black access on the F2 in the next move. Here, white can't push the pawn, because black will just take it, and it's an easy promotion for him. Going back to the start, we saw that King G3 is not the answer. But what about King F2, taking control of that problematic square? Unfortunately, this would also lose the game for white. If I were to describe this puzzle with one word, that word will be opposition. This is the key of drawing this puzzle, or in this position, after King F2, lose it. As I said, black wants to capture white pawn, but he has no way to approach it. Even so, if he doesn't have an available square right now, he can find a way to force white to give up his control over those squares, and that move is king to D2. This is known as a lateral opposition. Opposition, as the name suggested, is when two kings oppose each other, and the last player who moved has opposition. I have a video in which I explain this in more depth. I will link it in the video description, so be sure to check that as well. Here, black is now controlling the e squares, and white is forced to move, allowing black a square near his pawn. If white will go to f1, black would move to e1. The only square available from which you can defend your pawn is g2. Black is keeping opposition with the plan of pushing you away. And after king g3, we arrive in the same position where black is winning. If you are moving to g2, black again would use opposition by moving to e2, and again you will be forced away from your pawn. And if you are trying to move to g3, black would move to e1. This is also an opposition, a diagonal opposition. And after a few moves, you will arrive in this same scenario. Going back to the start, I hope it's a little clear about the importance of squares and how to use opposition in order to arrive in the most optimal place on the board. Black just demonstrated how he used opposition in 3 different ways to arrive on the f2 square, the square from which he can win white pawn. But this was only possible for him because he had opposition. If white had opposition instead, he could use the same technique to keep black away from that f2 square. This is the key of drawing this puzzle and to find the correct moves. The winning move, the drawing move here, is the move that will give white the opposition. But what is that move? If you set king g1, unfortunately no. Even if the kings oppose each other, that is not enough. In order to be in opposition, the number of squares between king should be an even number. 1 square, 3 square, or 5 square. If this is hard for you to remember, maybe you can remember like this. If the kings are on the same color, it's opposition. If not, there is no opposition. Plain and simple. After king g1, black will regain opposition with king e1. g2, we have e2, keeping that opposition. g3, king f1, and here we don't have an opposition because the kings aren't on the same color, or the kings don't see each other. But here it doesn't matter, because black plan is to arrive on f2 to win the pawn on f3. In order for white to gain opposition here, he should move to f3, but he can't because that square is blocked by his pawn. He can move to h3, gaining a diagonal opposition, but this doesn't help him, because he needs to protect his pawn. And after king g4, black will regain opposition with king g2, and now black is winning. I hope it's more clear now, and you are able to find the correct move. I will give you a few seconds. Okay, the drawing move is king to h1. We have the kings oppose each other? Yes. We have an even number of squares? Yes, it's 3 squares. We have the kings on the same color? Yes, they are both on a light square. Now that white has opposition, all he needs to do here is to keep it. So, if black would move to e1, white will move to g1. If black will try and be tricky with king d2, you need to remember to keep the opposition. King facing each other's, and the distance between them should be an even number of squares. Or, to simply remember it, you should put your king on the same color as the enemy king. So, what is your next move here as white? If you have set king f2, I have some bad news for you. This is not it. Even if you have opposition here, the problem is that you won't be able to keep it. In this puzzle, black didn't want to have opposition just for the sake of having it. He wants to have opposition because he wants to capture your pawn. And here you won't be able to keep having the opposition while also defend your pawn. Remember that I said a good chess player think in squares? Here whites want to keep black away from those squares, e3, e2 and f2, because from those squares black can attack your pawn. In this scenario, you can keep a lateral opposition, because the f3 square is blocked by your pawn. So, the only way to maintain an opposition is to have a diagonal one, by moving on f1, but by moving to that square, you would allow black to arrive on e3. If you want to keep a position, you would lose your pawn. And if you want to protect your pawn, you would lose opposition. The correct move in this position is to keep the opposition by moving to h2. Even if black arrives on e2, you can play g2, again opposition. And you see that black cannot capture your pawn, so he is forced to move. If he goes to e1, you need to keep a position on g1, because if you play king g3, this will be losing once again. After king f1, you are forced to give black access to the f2 square, and after this triangulation, you won't have any other available square from which you can protect your pawn. This is why g3 is a blunder and king g1 was the correct move. If black would move to d1, you need to keep that distant opposition, and you want to go back to h1, because if you will move to f1, you will blunder once again. A good way of thinking about this and to visualize it is that you want to mimic black movements. Here, if black is going up, you go up, and here, if black is going up once again, you can't go up because your pawn is blocking the way, so you would lose this game. But if you were on the h file, you could go up after black. Hope this will make some sense for you. So instead of f1, you go to h1. d2 by black, you follow with h2, mimicking black. e3, g3. d3, again mimic black by moving to h3. But what if he goes to d4? You can't go to h4, so what are you gonna do? Here is a little secret, except king g3, all the other king moves are drawing. Why is that? Because your pawn is controlling the e4 square, and that square would have given black the opposition. But if you are moving to g4, for example, he can move to e4 to regain opposition, so he will move to e3. But you gain opposition by moving king g3, and this is drawing. This will continue over and over again. You will keep black away from your pawn by using your king, and sooner or later this game will either be a draw by repetition, or black will push his g-pawn, you will capture it, and you will go into a queen versus queen endgame. There you have it, that's all for today. Don't forget to check my other video about opposition, and if you like this video, to share it, like and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next one, guys.